Hey guys, so in this one we're going to do some concepting slash design. This is actually pretty separate from 3D modeling. So we're going to do some in 2D, some in 3D. But this is something a lot of guys will run into. They just have a really hard time with. And I'm not the best designer myself, so this is kind of just as a person that's still trying to get better at doing it, this is just something you can use to get started at least, right? Some of the things I've learned along the way. So we're going to start, let's just start up in Krita, your design template A3 here, and go over some basics again. So I did that shape design video. It kind of helps a little bit, but it doesn't go over a lot of things that probably could have tapped on. And so here's the deal. Designing is focusing on some art fundamentals for the most part. Let me turn this back to basics so I can actually draw here for a little bit. So let's go to the top left if I can ever find it. There you go. All right. So first up, art fundamentals, right? Because some of you guys are like, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I don't." You're a 3D modeler. You're going to be an artist at some point. Trust me. Um, do you have to be good at drawing? No, you don't actually. But so think like basics, like shapes, right? All your basic shapes. And so these are like your fundamentals for like all art is shapes, really. What kind of shapes you're creating. Okay. Think about edges. Oh, that's an edge. Sure. Can you make edges more interesting by breaking them up? Sure. So there you go. You can make edges more interesting by doing these little things like this, all right? And so edges. Now, what about like if I can spell it, that'd be nice. Now, what about false edges? So, like, say you drew a box. Here's a good exercise for you. You draw a box or a cube or a rectangle or whatever, and you chop the corners off, right? Start thinking about creating your models this way, where you're just chopping it up, and you're starting to create the primary kind of shape here, right? The reason why is because what ends up happening here is you'll probably break up an edge later on, right? Something like that. And maybe you break up one down here, it's a little bit different. Who knows? And then you might connect the dots, right? So now you're starting to break up a shape. So you're breaking the cube is more or less what you're doing. You could do this with cylinders and spheres and all kinds of other fun stuff. So, but when you cut an edge on a box, if you were to, well, let's just erase this one, I guess. Let's say we cut it up. Here we go. I'm overextending my lines here just to kind of stay loose, but let's say you went ahead and you cut off the edges. Anything that you cut, right? Or you're not necessarily cutting it. You could round these as well. Okay, so you'll see different artists. They go through these different things because some guys are wanting to create more, like let's say like more human shapes, right? Human shapes, human designs usually tend to be boxier, generally speaking. Not always, but or they're rounded. They have they round the edges out. So when you create a shape like this, it's one thing. But if you took that same shape and you rounded the edges out, right, it becomes a little bit different. And if you round them out at different levels, like maybe this one's really soft, right, you get something that's just a little bit different. So you'll see these artists, they work off these two primary fundamentals here that they're just breaking up a box or cube or sphere or whatever. They're starting to do some cuts into it. So those would be negatives, right? That'd be like a little negative section. And then they might add something to it. So this might pop out a little bit, right? Right here. And then that might be a positive. Instead of a subtraction, negatives are also known as subtractions, right? Positives or additions. See? Okay, so what about composition, right, of the layout of the shape? So this is what people are talking about when they talk about composition. There's something that the Romans came up with. I think it was the Romans, anyway, it's the Greeks or somebody. So whatever. The thing here is that it created this idea of this perfect ratio. It's called the golden ratio. It's like a little spirally thing or whatever. And so they thought everything had to fit within that ratio to be perfect. And it ends up working the same as the rule of thirds. It's like one, this is like 1/3 of everything, right? Like this here, third, 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 right? This little area is a third, third. Okay. And so as designers have come about and worked on more things, they figured out different ratios where there's like, like 10, 20s, and then 70s, right? Something like that. So you could break up shapes this way as well. So if you said you created a box, right, and you chop off a corner, and you're like, chop these corners off real quick, one bigger, yeah, sure. Now you have this shape here in the middle, right? We're not bolding it out a little so we see it better, but you got the shape in the middle. Well, now what do? You split it up into thirds, right? So you might do that, but you don't do it necessarily like that. You might cut it like right here to there or something. I don't know. And then you split that one in thirds or something like that. And so now you end up with a large section that might be like 70, 10, and whatever, 20, something like that, right? And so you can start using those thirds ideas to come up with more interesting things as you go along. Let's say you're doing like a rounded shape and it was something more organic in nature, perhaps something like this, right? And so how would you split that up? It's a three-dimensional shape now, so it's the same idea though. It's like you put a panel line here, whatever, and give it some interesting face here, like make a interesting little camera or something, right? Something like that. So you get the idea. No great drawings here right now, but you can do this. You do a little negative here at the back, and then you do a positive. So let's talk about layering. Okay, we'll do this one in 3D. Been over here enough. So a lot of times that applies to layering as well. So you could say like you have a cube. Okay, that's cool. What if we made it really thin, right? And we duplicate it, and then we made it a little bit thicker and scaled it down and pushed it to right here. Okay, now we have this going on. So a lot of sci-fi designs, if you start paying attention, they'll end up doing this little thing where they kind of like stack the same detail on top of itself 3 times in different ratios. So these might get thinner and thinner, where the main shape might be the thickest part of it, right? Something like that. You'll see this transpire a lot in like Halo and all kinds of stuff. Just it's everywhere. So they'll chop off corners, right? Some more so than others. And then they'll play around with this idea. Alt Q to switch between things. They'll just kind of go around and do this. This has less to do with technical skill as it does um, just designing in general. Designing is like a different muscle in the brain, and it has nothing to do with how to use Blender. It has everything to do with just how to create interesting compositions of shapes, making good use of positive and negative space, different kinds of edges. Because this is cool, sure, but could we make it more interesting? Yeah, probably by breaking it up, maybe by simplifying it because it's a little bit too much going on right now. Sure, and so you have to think about those kinds of things, right? Like, so you'll see this kind of pattern take place quite a bit. I'll just leave it at that. Um, Stacking or layering or whatever you want to call that. Okay, I like to call it stepping. The reason why is because usually when a lot of architects do this, they do like a piece of terrain they're going to put a house on or some hotel or something, and it's an uneven piece of terrain. Well, they usually do that little number where they have the buildings come down like this, right? But they don't do it like that because that's boring. So they do it like one big one, and then they layer it on top of itself, maybe, right? Something like that, or maybe just two of them, and then they do another layer up here, something like that. See what I'm saying? I might do a balcony out here or something like that. Okay, and so this is going to break you into the idea of just creating your own ideas and concepts just by paying careful attention to that big primary shape. I think that's the most important thing is like that big overall picture. If you don't get that right, you can't detail any of this. You can't add little, cuts here or there, or maybe like a little wall panel there and little panels here. And like, where would you put your lines for the concrete, right? Like, where do those go? Like every third? Well, those end up lining up. Let's not do that. So maybe make that one a little bit larger. And maybe this one over here is just split in half or something. I don't know. So you get the idea. You start playing with these things. Now, paralleling lines is something more interesting. It's when you have compound shapes. Compound shapes, you start adding like cubes and cubes together. It's almost like layering in a way. So you can just do something like this. We're looking at not like it's not supposed to be 3 dimensional. We're just looking at the shape here. But when you start doing this little paralleling of lines like this, you can start to see a little bit more interest come out of it, right? Like this. It's all paralleled in some areas. It should be anyways. So now you end up with these cool parallel lines, and it works for some reason, but you're not sure why. So you can start to build upon that, like basically cut out any kind of shape you want for the most part. Just be crude with it for a second. Um, when you have, like, say, these are two opposing edges, right? Like they're opposing each other, but these two are kind of paralleling each other now over here. These two are off angled with each other. They don't look right. So you'd have to either make them match or have to parallel them with each other. And you run into these little situations where, like, maybe that particular edge, anyways, I'm going to rotate for this, but just leaving it straight might be better, right? And then figuring out how to break the shape up more from there might be more beneficial because we have no real good symmetry going on here, stuff like that. Oh, and I skipped over the 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 false lines, the empty space lines is what I was trying to get to. I don't know exactly what you call this. Empty. I just call it empty space lines or whatever. But basically, like, say you're doing a shape, real simple, and you want to break it up. So you're like, I want a line here, right? And like, yeah, that looks okay, but that's really not that good looking. So like, what do I do with that? Um, Sometimes you can add the idea that the line goes through in that area by adding a little, um, adding that edge, but in part to that area, and it suddenly looks a lot better. You see what I'm saying? So you still get the idea there's a line there, but you don't actually see it. So that's kind of a fun way to work with an empty space edge as opposed to like hard surface edge there like that. So you can do that with other things as well. When you have like rounded corners, like you might have a rounded corner and you want to put a cylinder in this area, but you want like a cylinder going back around this way instead of actually creating that like a cut in here where it sticks out or it cuts in. You could just create like a panel that comes out right here, right? See what I'm saying? It's not like a big dip in. It's just a little slight detail that maybe tends to work out in that area, right? So you can do things like that as well. Okay. It all plays with 3D, but it's in general. So the fundamentals, shapes, edges, um, tones is another thing. How bright and how dark things are. This is more to do with lighting and materials necessarily, not necessarily, but it does play a role in your overall shapes as well. Just use an example here. Somebody was doing a video. One of the Halo devs, I think, artists, did a video on crates. And so, like, you can see if I generate a crate, we already split it in thirds, basically, right? That's kind of what's going on there. And we put a little handle area in here, and then that's okay. It's kind of boring in the middle there. Maybe we do a third down here instead, right? So maybe there's like a little handle area here, and maybe another one up there, right? So that's where you're starting to see those things come together. Let's use a color for this one, and or tones. Sorry, we're doing tones. Uh, let's say this whole shape. We'll use the marker on the opacity halfway, or a square tip marker here in Krita, but just an opacity brush basically, right? So let's say this is all like this one tone here, but this is going to be like a darker paint, or it's in shade, or it's in shadow. So we get these different tonal values, right? Let's go pure black real quick. And this is the handle area where maybe it's like recessed in there, but it could possibly come back out and stick out, right? Like the little travel luggage type handle. It closes up, telescopes or whatever. Maybe it does something like that, right? And so now we can start to figure out our composition in this manner as well. How does this actual shape break up? And like what is it going to look like when let's say you toss some color on it, like these are yellows maybe, and then maybe this is I don't know, some kind of off beige like color like this, and it could be light in there as well, but it's just a different tone, right? So you could do things like that, and then you can kind of mix them up where like might have a strip of one show up in the other. So you can break it up even more. It's just really basic idea here, but you get the idea that you can start to play with this, right? Like you can do all kinds of things. I'd probably go with like an orange in the middle myself, like a dark brownish orange, maybe something like that. There, right? Start playing with these really crude drawings, guys. I'm telling you, it'll take you pretty far because then you just keep working on the idea. It's like, hey, I did this, but maybe it looks right, maybe it doesn't. You can always create a new layer, right? Go to black and just keep sketching on it, which is a lot of fun. Because then you could say like, well, these edges are boring, so let's cut them, right? Let's cut them out a little bit, something like that. And you might want to go to this original layer and toss it back down in value, opacity. So when you're sketching on this thing, you can just keep kind of resketching. Maybe this would look better with a little angle like this in it or something, right? A little slight angle to it or something. I don't know. It probably should match this, so maybe we can parallel them. Create like a little column here. Like it looks like a little rook or something in the corner. See? You do the same thing on the other side basically, but you can start to work out these different little shapes, little ideas. It doesn't have to be good. There's one of the artists at the Noman School, right? Amazing sculptor. He's always on the stream. He starts off his sculptures, I think, doing these really crude drawings, and he's an amazing artist. But um, yeah, they start like this, guys. Just do side drawings, orthographic drawings. You can do sketches. You can do all kinds of different techniques to establish your main shape. Just toss in some color. Knock the layer back a little bit, and then go over it and sketch on it a little. See what you can come up with. It doesn't have to be very good. You start to develop different ideas and see what works and what doesn't work. But be a little bit deliberate about it too. Don't just like go too crazy. And see what you can come up with. And even if you're drawing flat 2D from the side, like orthographic type stuff, if you start to see things pop out in 3D, just sketch it out in 3D. You don't have to finish the drawing here, right? You're not illustrating it necessarily. Um, this is part of just the idea of like rough concepting, really. Like I think this is cool here, but I don't like that line, right? So maybe I create some false lines here by or empty lines. I don't know what you call them actually. To be honest, I forgot the name of it. But you could do this, right? You could detail cram in corners, so you add lots and lots of details like primary shapes. Your primary, and then you have like your secondary, right? So primary, secondary, and then maybe you have a little slither here with a bunch of little shapes in here. That's detail cramming, basically, and that'll be your third shapes or your tertiary shapes, right? And so now you can start to build out these ideas rather fast. They're crude, and that's okay. I mean, you have to keep refining these things as you work along, and that's called iteration, right? Like you're iteratively designing something. It's about fast iteration. But you should be able to start creating an idea and then building up upon it, and upon it, upon it. Uh, and so, a real fun way to do this is by doing a new layer and just sketching some shapes like super fast. Like you could do it that way. Personally, the tried and true method I like, which is you take this fat square tip brush of some sort, pure black, and you just go and you start doing some left and right motions to create more human looking stuff, right? And you can start creating some really cool interests real quick. Just doing these different little doodles like this, do more lefts and rights, and it will look more human. If you start to do more crazy shapes, what ends up happening is that it will actually start to look like more alien in nature. Sometimes it'll become almost abstract to the point people don't know what it is if they're looking at it. You might see something, but they won't. But this is real good. And you can chop corners off. Just press E, select the eraser, straighten an edge out a little, cut in some details here, change your brush size, work it a little bit more. Right? And all these little differences in every stroke, they start to add up after a while, though. And so you can start to parallel things and all that fun stuff. But you'll knock this back, right? And now you're focused just on that shape. You can go back over it with a pen and just like say, hey, um, This shape here, this is obviously a big shape here that I like, right? Maybe it comes up here and does this. So that's a good split point. And then maybe this splits down here at the bottom as well. It's like a DeWalt battery looking thing here at the bottom. So you get the idea, right? Little power drill battery. It could be a boat motor. What if this was a boat motor, right? Who knows? You can do all kinds of things. You turn this shape into anything you imagine. Uh, Maybe it has like a little grill here that splits into thirds, right? I don't know. Just come up with your ideas. You don't have to be very strong at it. It's just fun. And just play with them. Right, so if this was a boat motor, I don't know if I like that there. All right. Now you can see I got some parallels going, which is nice. So we might be able to work that out. Let's see, this is going back pretty far like that. So let's do that here and then pull it up. Then do it again. Okay, so that's kind of stepping, that kind of creating that little stepping, the architect thing, right? What they do sometimes. Pretty common technique, I guess. And yeah, let's chop this corner off. It looks ugly, right? Chop it off a bit. All right, and so now you can keep working on it. You create another layer. You can knock that back if you wanted to, but you can be like, well, obviously there's a line going through here, but I don't want to draw another line. That's ridiculous of an idea. Maybe you just make these little tiny, I don't know, maybe right across the symmetry there, or like across the line. You do like these little clamps or something. Or maybe you do put the line, but it's real faint. It's real hard to see, and then you have clamps on top of it. Right, so it does create like a little panel breakup. It has like these little offset clamps. So this whole piece can just like fold off or something. Maybe there's a hinge down here. You can, add in a little hinge and it all pulls forward because that should run flat with that, but then the propeller might be too big now. So you get the idea, but you can start breaking these ideas up and they're really cool, interesting shapes and figures rather quickly, right? All right, so with that out of the way, I wanted to talk about something else that's really fun. If you are kind of want to take a cheater shortcut method, I'm going to use a picture here. If I can copy it, hopefully I can. All right, so a little trick that a lot of concept artists use that they don't talk about too much is that they will, if I can find my layer. Where's my layer? Oh, it's way down here. That's why. Okay, so here's just a picture of a little battery backup thing or whatever the case is. All right, so we're going to take that and let me look up one other thing. Let me look up, I had some ideas offhand, but I'm not thinking of them now. Let's do a train. Let's do a train. Yeah. They're kind of the same shape a little bit. Let's do like an old steam train from the same angle almost. Literally was like the first thing that popped up in a search result. So don't get discouraged. This stuff's you just have to find similar angles. They don't have to be perfect, but like here's a train. Here's this train image is smaller. Let's bring this one down to its size. Scale it down. We'll shift while doing it here in Krita. Put it above there. So let's like say use this front of this shape here and turn it into a train instead, or like some kind of like future monorail system or something. So Krita, you can hold control and you can kind of fix perspectives a little bit. It's kind of cool, right? Unfortunately, you can't skew them really. I don't think. If you can, I haven't figured it out yet. But let's try that one more time. It needs to be more like on the rails, right? Something like that maybe. Can't skew, I think. It's weird. You have to enter this one first. It's destructive when you do that, and then you got to do one of these little guys up here. Perspective. Yeah, there you go. Can't do them at the same time though. I think Photoshop you can do them at the same time, but here not so much. Right. All right. So let's go ahead and bump it down. You can see how they're like hard to see next to each other. Sometimes that happens. You'll have to play with your brightness and contrast of each layer sometimes, and then change blending methods. Usually, you can just mouse wheel through these real quick. And that's the train one. Let's do regular there, normal. On the top layer, let's do an overlay. See if we can't, do some kind of negative space or something. All right, so basically, what you're looking at, you getting the idea here. You seeing some shapes popping out of it while I flick through these. Like you can find different things you might want to work with. I really liked this one so far because it gives me a nice idea of like the different things I can work with here. So you could take these. You could just you can group them. Control Shift U. You can desaturate one at a time. In this case, we got to do the top one. Just desaturate a little. Try to find the blend amount here that we want to go with between the two different layers. Which apparently it just stopped working. All right, that's cool. It's not supposed to, but it did. Each layer we should be able to adjust the brightness contrast then. I think the back one needs to go lighter. So it's hue, saturation, HSV adjustment here is the best one to use, I think. So we can just kind of mix these up a little. All right, and obviously they're not centered with each other. I could have took more time to get this more correct. But anyways, um, we're starting to see the idea that whole section just blast it back a little bit. Now you get the idea that you can just go above this and create a layer on top. If it stopped creating it inside of it, that'd be great. Now we can use a pen or marker or whatever, and we can literally just go to town on this and sketch on it. And so you're getting this idea like, where's our symmetry line? Where do we want it to be? I guess right here is probably the best spot for it. Um, oh, why is it drawn on that one? Go back. There you go. There you go. This is probably our best spot for symmetry. Right. This is mostly a cube, kind of with a rounded top, right? So we probably want it going across the tracks as well. So we'll have to shift some of this potentially. So it's mostly just a box. This is why they say break the box, guys. This is a good practice to get into, is to break the box. Okay. And so now you're starting to see some interesting designs and things in here that you might want to trace over. And while you can't really sell this artwork, it's technically considered a derivative. Um, it's definitely good for concepting because if you modeled this out, you didn't really copy anybody's stuff for the most part. You copied some real life stuff, but change it up quite a bit, and nobody's gonna think twice about it. All artists copy at the end of the day to some extent. It's just how honest you want to be with yourself when it comes to that is a different question entirely, right? It's more of a personal thing, I think. But so we can go through this. We have to figure out what's interesting. I got to figure out where my symmetry is going to be, if there is going to be symmetry. Obviously, this big cylinder shape, I really wanted to keep it, but it doesn't. If I symmetrized it over here, it'd be like ridiculously large. So maybe I just drag it all forward a little bit longer and make it smaller. And I'm just loose here, right? This is not, we are not going crazy here, guys. I like this idea of this like inset grill like this. Like it just does this number, right? It's kind of like this little weird paneling in here or something, right? Super cool. Still got some of the original lines of the top here. And the only problem with this, though, is if you're not real strong in drawing in perspective, you're going to run into a problem where you create paradoxes. And you can do this in 2D too, as side orthographic view. You can create paradoxes. So you have to be careful of that because if you ever try to 3D model off of a paradox, you're going to quickly realize you can't. And it's not that you can't correct it, it's just that you're going to not going to get exactly what you try to sketch out. And then it becomes a little bit of a problem. And we're talking paradoxes, we're talking like MC Escher type stuff. Like, um, let's see, like if I cut that, I'm gonna have a hard time doing it when I want to do it. Like I never do it on purpose. It's just something that happens. But like some things won't just line up with each other. Like this coming out here means that the front's out here. But if I was to say, like, I don't know, do something like that maybe. Anyways, I'll never generate it when I want it, right? So We could play with just like half of the shape too. Like if you really don't want to do the symmetry, you don't have to. If you're going to 3D modeling, a lot of concept artists will still start kind of these traditional methods, come up with cool ideas real fast, and then they'll go straight to block out in 3D. They'll add materials, they'll do a bunch of modeling, sculpting, whatever to create the image they want to create for their concepts, and then they'll just they'll paint over them later on or photobash on top of them, or they'll actually just create pretty much full-on renders these days, and then barely touch it with a couple strokes here or there, and correct some colors and do some things like that, and maybe do some stacking, like image compositing is what I'm trying to say, not stacking exactly. In photography, you could consider it stacking images, right? Like you can stack images as well. So, but you get the idea. Your line weights are also important because they could establish like what is the bottom of something. And you can add a little bit of like cross hatching. You know, hatching is when you do like lines, right? Cross hatching is when you do lines and then maybe go the other way. And you can create shading that way. So you can mimic that. You don't have to be like real good at it. You just mimic it. And, okay, so we almost got a paradox here. Basically, if I continue this one down, right, this almost doesn't work. It looks like it tucks into the side of it like that, but it almost doesn't work. It's so like this here probably doesn't need to happen, right? Kind of something like that, anyways. It's hard to reproduce, I guess. So, and the more you do this, the more you'll remember these little details you're doing, which is fun. Tracing, basically, right? Copying. It's something you did as a kid, and usually kids that sometimes I feel like the kids that traced more when they were younger probably ended up creating better artworks later on in life because they just got used to working with the lines of the things they wanted to make. Like some guys will say, like, "Oh no, you got to learn to freehand all the lines you want to create." But I don't know. It doesn't sometimes it doesn't seem like you'd have to. If you guys draw or sketch, you have to let me know. Were you a tracer or were you just kind of going at it freely? I used to just go at everything freely, but I never paid much attention to like how great my perspectives were or nothing like that. But even that shows to this day. That's like my signature crappiness, I guess, right? Something I could probably improve upon. And so, yeah, you could just go and go and go and figure out like where you're putting these additional little elements. You got tons of ideas now to start with, right? Some of it's almost completely randomly generated, almost like using a generator, guys. You use generators to create things in 3D all the time, and well, this is the 2D equivalent of that. So you can compound shapes together, basically. You can compound two objects together. Now have this going on. Like, where do you go from here? Who knows? Could go all over the place, I guess, but I don't know. This looks like some weird roundedness stuff going on in here, which I don't really care for, but you can work that kind of stuff out later on. So hopefully this will get you into that mindset of that. Even though like this looks fantastic, I didn't do much work, guys. I mean, there's a little bit of skill here involved when it comes to drawing in perspective, like creating cubes and stuff. I usually follow, perspective to me is kind of easy. 2 point perspective. That's all I really pay attention to. Photographs are 3 point usually, but vanishing points, right? I mean, they go up and down, and if you're not comfortable with this stuff here in Krita, at least you have a drawing assistant. You can do 2 point, and I could probably even match this because it looks like it's somewhere back here, the perspective vanishing point. So I can draw another one, which I'm not sure where I would place that one, but it would be something like this, right? So there's drawing assistant, you see? It almost steal the information of the image rather quickly. And yeah, so there we go. I'm not going to finish that whole thing, obviously. So you would do like a loose sketch if you wanted to create like a really cool artwork. You'd fill it in with like a gray, shade it all up, start adding textures and colors and whatever else. But yeah, never forget those principles there while you're doing this. If you're using the drawing assistant, this little crosshair annoys you. Go to View and Show System Preview, turn it off. But Like say this here, this looks cool, but maybe I want to continue that down somehow and bring this shape forward, right? Let's try to draw on the right layer. Okay. Um, so maybe this comes back a little bit further. We could probably work it out somehow. I don't know what I'd do yet, but probably have to keep going with another kind of setup here in the back, more than likely, because it wasn't quite finished. Like the conductor window or whatever. So maybe this is some kind of like futuristic monorail. That was the idea. Probably wouldn't have these big wheels at the bottom then. It'd probably be more like a maglev type deal. So you could take another image possibly and just say like, yeah, those wheels look ridiculous on this. You could take another image of like some kind of battery box or pipe or whatever, something. If as long as it's in a similar perspective, you'll probably be all right. But I'm just gonna freely sketch it in and try to anyways. You see how it looks like it extends out this way? So it's on the wrong edge, kind of. It needs to go towards the perspective. So that can happen too, right? If you're not careful. But maybe this is just, it does come out for a little while and then it drops, small, there. So we're going to create like a little shape like that. Try to get these lines right, but now we can start to see where that little adding additional boxes and chopping the corners off goes, right? Like, oh, it's just a chamfer there. It's not a big deal. Um, but now that's starting up the idea of creating a futuristic steampunk kind of maglev train. We'll even include the light because why not? Like a hybrid mix of stuff. But we can, we can certainly come through and panel some of these out, right? Or make it look more official, like make it look like some kind of like Tesla train or something. I don't know. Could be something cool like that, maybe. Some more little details here that match. You would want to work these very carefully, these headlight areas, but you can do that later. That's a kind of like a third detail. A lot of these are third details. You wouldn't necessarily do it right away. See, I like this, but I want it to be in front of that shape there, so I got to correct the perspective there, basically. See, I want that to be run across there like that. But trick to this one, I don't want to create that line there like this. I want it to go back there, maybe to. Trying to think of how I want to do this. Now I'm getting into some issues where this would be hard to model. So that's the wrong angle. Well, not the wrong angle, but it's like it's misleading. The shapes here are misleading. All right, and so one thing I didn't touch on was that the idea of doing like boxes, breaking the cube, and then doing cylinders. Those are two different types of shapes, like primary shapes. I'm gonna try to. I guess we're gonna have to push it forward. It looks like it wants to go forward more, huh? But right here, maybe we do like a false edge or something to that area. Cut this here. Cut that in there. All right. Give a little depth to that one. Weird. Okay. And so because I don't know what to do here in the middle, the easiest answer is just do those big X things, right? That's the cheater shortcut, I think. Was just do those paneling lines like that. Feels like a shortcut, anyways. Oh, so let's get back to that. The idea is that when you have like a cylinder, you have a square. A lot of times you don't want to mix the two. Like if you're doing a rounded looking shape, you don't want to mix it with a squared or a chamfered shape, usually, generally speaking. Sometimes you can get away with it, but like if you're doing a box you might want to stick with boxier shapes, and you might toss in like a cylinder. So there's like a ratio of different things you can use. Like you have a box, you might have like a big cylinder, and then maybe a couple little triangles, right? So you can do different kinds of things like that potentially. Now here's the reason why I mentioned it though, is that sometimes you could do like a shape that turns into another shape, right? So like here's a box and you want it to turn into a cylinder. So you create like this little cylinder outline here. And so what ends up happening is um, you turn one shape into the other shape. You just got to know how to draw them a little bit. This turns into like you'll see this happens a lot in industrial design. Guys transform one shape to another shape, and they'll do it at different ratios. So like this is, you know, something like this, and then there might be a cylinder here. So this might be like a flashlight. Who knows? Who knows? Something like that. But they start breaking it all up in all these different ways. Maybe this runs flush here almost. And maybe these run back to the front here somehow. Right? You see what I'm saying? Like just all this just stuff that can happen in here. I don't want these lines going through here. Instead I'd rather do this and then have little things like this going on maybe. Anyway, so you can play with these design ideas. This looks pretty bad. I don't think that worked out there. But kind of like how you make lightsabers and stuff too. Figure like maybe this needs more. This is too straight here, so like cut at least one of them, cut them up, something like that. Right. And this is just the start of a illustration. If you wanted it to be one, I'd personally just sketch it and then go and use something like Illustrator to do like cell shading or something like that. I think it's probably one of the most efficient workflows. Just start with a rough sketch and then cell shade it. But the photobash technique, pretty cool, right? Yeah, I think it's a good one. I like that one a lot. But, and then so we'll call that there for this video. But I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll check you guys out in the next one. All right, take care.